So far we've talked about growing, harvesting food, preparing and sharing it, accessing and celebrating it, and now we're going to talk about food waste. We've kind of positioned this thing as a circle, but food waste kind of shows up at every single point in this life cycle. And so while you're growing it, if some of that food or some of that produce doesn't grow well, or maybe has some blemishes. Sometimes it doesn't even, leave the farm.
Right.
Some
Like
of it
the ugly fruit and the ugly vegetables.
totally right. And some of it, maybe it gets distributed or it gets to a grocery store, but maybe it spoils on the way. And so some of it becomes waste at that point. And then there's the preparing it. There's can be waste produced in that. So we think about, the veggie scraps of
Right.
and then of course the eating, right? If everything doesn't get consumed, I don't think about everything from a sandwich that was half finished to I don't know, apple
Or
cores.
stuff in the fridge that everyone has at home that gets pushed to the back of the fridge and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Totally.
I get in trouble for doing that at home. I'm trying to do better.
Yeah, that's honestly, it's a huge one. And a lot of that stuff along the way, if it just gets thrown into the garbage, it's essentially being removed from this food cycle, especially if it gets thrown into a landfill and then just like buried over with a mountain of garbage and like eventually a bunch of soil where it's just gonna like,
Produces methane and then kind of just
yeah.
is not doing the best it could be doing.
Yeah. And so, if we can be clever about food waste, I think we're minimizing as much of it as possible along that journey from like growing, until to consuming. But I think what we're talking about here with some of these images is, if and when, probably when we're producing waste, how can we treat that waste not as like something gross or a problem that needs to be disposed of, but as a potential solution and really as an input maybe for completing that life cycle and going back to the growing side of things.
Right. So it's more thinking of it more in terms of an opportunity to help you grow more food.
Yeah. And so here we've got somebody with their green bin. City of Edmonton rolled out, that have been a year ago,
A
2 years
year ago,
ago. Yeah. Not too long ago. Yeah, about a year ago. And so in Edmonton now, we are asked to divide our waste into essentially recyclables, garbage, and then organics, where the city will take those organics and compost them at the city facility. Even better, the city would love it if you took those organics and composted them at home, because that's more energy efficient. And of course, if you're a home gardener or a school gardener, you can then take that compost and apply it directly to the garden, which is going to help you, start that cycle all over again.
And composting at school can look like there's many different ways that you can actually do this. One of the ways that some of you may be familiar with, if you think back to your grade 4 science class, would be vermiculture or worm composting. So those are in the picture here, little red wiggler worms that are renowned across the planet for their ability to help compost food very quickly. And then that turns into a real nutrient dense material that can then help to grow more food. So, maybe this side of the cycle is something that speaks to you, and maybe you want to start questioning how can we deal with waste more at our school. Another way of doing things would be to have an outdoor composter, which is not at all impossible at a school too, but would require a little bit of research probably to look at.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for schools is probably, it's not that you can't do this stuff. A lot of it, I think, is like might be tricky to get the scale right, depending on the size of your school and how much waste you produce.
Yeah.
How many worm bins do you need, or how many outdoor compost bins do you need in order to make it functional?
Yeah. So it's really interesting, but there's also a lot of problem solving involved with this too. So thinking of this side of, how can this kind of help address issues of food insecurity? Well, if you're producing your own compost, your own fertilizer, basically, that can then get put back into your own or local, or maybe, local homes for families. There's all sorts of ways that this can get put back into the food cycle.
I've seen some like some groups raise money with compost sales.
Right.
Right. So it actually has, like, far from being a waste product, like it actually has value when it comes out the other end, right? As compost, like people will pay money for that added nutrient. And so even if you didn't have a garden on site, I'm sure that somebody would be very eager to take your good compost and put it to use.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of thinking about career type things. There's a lot of opportunity for this as well. There's a company in town which 5 years ago operated on a small scale, but they were still producing like several tons of worm compost a day. Now they've moved close to, they've got, last year when I talked to them, they had 3 different facilities. One of them was sort of out by the airport. It's gigantic. They are producing worm compost as a compost, and then also as a liquid that they sell to farmers and local businesses, as well as just the average person who has a garden at home. So their inputs, which means the stuff that they have to invest and buy, a lot of it's free because they get all of the food scraps from different grocery stores that don't want them anymore. Worm composters, worms also love coffee, so they can go to coffee shops and get all of their waste material from there too.
Sometimes you might even be able to get paid to take someone's waste away.
Yeah.
Right?
So basically you're getting paid twice.
They pay you to take their waste, and then you take that waste and you turn it into something you can sell. That's a pretty good deal. James, I want you to, we don't have a slide for this, but you have some experience with mushroom cultivation.
Yes.
And I feel like mushroom cultivation kind of fits in nicely with this sort of waste as a resource.
It kind of does. And it does in a really fun sort of a way. I can give you an example of something I did, and I wish I'd put a picture in here, over the summer, is I had a pair of old pants, and these pants were ripped everywhere. They'd been repaired several times. They were 10 or 12 years old, and they were just done. And I read about a way that you could help to decompose the pants and have mushrooms as well. So I grew mushrooms out of these pants, and the pants are in a bin at Queen Elizabeth School. The last harvest of mushrooms, I think I had about a half pound of mushrooms that I took home that Liz, my wife, and I ate for dinner. And the mushrooms are also breaking down the material in the pants, which makes them actually compostable. So once the process of mushrooms growing inside of them is done, so when they're done producing mushrooms and the mycelium's kind of all sort of finished with it, then that can go into my composter in my backyard, and then it'll decompose it, and I'll have a bunch of pants in my garden. So
yeah, the mushroom thing is fascinating to me, and to take that in like another little bit of a tangent. You've been playing around with using mushrooms as like a building material. So taking like waste, it could be not necessarily food scraps, but often waste from agriculture. So things like maybe like straw as an example.
Straw, and then there's also grain from breweries.
Right.
There's a lot of new breweries in town in Edmonton, and they have a lot of waste because they'll use grain for the brewing process, but then they just get rid of it. But it's still really, there's a lot of use left in this material.
And so you could compost it, or you could use fungi to break it down to the point where it's soil, but in the process be harvesting mushrooms from it. And you can also I've seen you with your, the little pot, the plant pot you built, where you made a mold of this waste, inoculated it with mushrooms, and then this mycelium, the body of the fungi, like grows into the shape of the mold, and then you actually like dried it out, and you have this like this object.
Yeah, a plant pot, and it's actually pretty dense. There are a lot of, this is really interesting. There are a lot of businesses now. Well, not many. There are some that are popping up. Mostly in the US. I know there's one in New York, and what they do is they take this material and they build things out of it. So they'll build a a lot of packaging. So rather than having styrofoam, so if you get like a new TV or something and there's styrofoam around it protecting it from getting cracked, rather than using styrofoam, which will end up while inert, so it doesn't release any toxins or anything into the dirt, it's just going to be there for centuries. And there's few ways of breaking it down and turning into new material. So what this company is doing is they're taking the material that you would use to grow mushrooms and making the forms out of it that are needed to protect different items. And when you're done with it, you can throw it in the garbage, or you can throw it in your compost rather, and it'll just it'll compost really easily.
I I feel like maybe it doesn't look very glamorous, right? Like food waste or waste in general. But I feel pretty strongly that if you take a look at like any sort of like waste stream, like there's probably a business waiting to happen there if you can find a way to turn that waste into a resource. And when it's or anything organic, right, that was living, I mean, there's a lot of really cool things you can do with it, from compost to growing mushrooms to building packaging material, and I think we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, and even inorganic material like plastic. I know we're sort of veering off topic and getting a bit rambly, but something really amazing is there are a number of entrepreneurs across the world who are looking at all the waste plastic in their communities, and they're collecting it and they're turning it into pellets, and they're mixing it with sand and turning them into bricks. So that this plastic, which is just, it's free and it's garbage and it's littered all over their towns and their cities, cleaning it and turning it into bricks so they can build buildings out of it. They can pave sidewalks and driveways and all sorts of things out of it. So it's, I guess, to sum things up, if you look at waste, and you can kind of see food waste as an opportunity. So what opportunity is that? I mean, you are all you are all young geniuses. You can kind of come up with these crazy ideas. So, what if food waste was a resource at your school? What could you do with it?
And I don't think your tangent with the plastic was even too much of a tangent, because, food waste we can easily fit packaging in there, cans and bottles, right? Yeah. Tetra Packs, styrofoam. So, there's a lot that kind of, a lot of waste that comes with just the moving and packaging of food. So I think, you could absolutely take that into consideration. So think about this question, along with the other questions from the other parts of the food life cycle, and think about these what if statements, right? So what if food was a waste? What if we grew food at schools? What if everybody could access food? What if we processed it? These are all hopefully like windows into, I don't know, that food secure school that that you can start working on.
Yeah, and it could be that one of these sections speaks to you, and maybe that's the one that you and your group want to focus on. Certainly, as Dustin mentioned at the beginning of this little series of videos, like this is a vast topic, so it's not going to be possible necessarily for you to address every part of it, but maybe there's one part when we think about what makes your school community unique. We talked about regenerative thinking. One of the sections of regenerative thinking, I can't remember what it's called, of course, but I think it was number 2. It talks about how is your situation unique? So what does your school have physically around you that might lend itself to one of these sort of subtopics of the food cycle? So what sorts of things are in your community that would help out? Do you have restaurants? Do you have businesses in your community that might contribute to this sort of a thing? And beyond that too, like you have other students in your school and they have family members, and every family member has a talent. So maybe there's something that can get found in there as well. So don't forget to think outside your own group, and use the talents of the people around you, and then also think about what makes your community unique, both physically and as a big group.
I think that's a really important point because the solutions that a group of students might come up with at Queenie could be very different from what some Lillian students come up with. And that's because like those are very different places with their own unique kind of context and communities around them, and needs. And so, um, yeah, that's to be expected, and actually kind of like the best result because I love it because you can get like a variety of little solutions everywhere. And maybe at some point they can kind of bleed over from one to another, adapting to the context of that new location.
Right.